Every speedrunning community faces different and unique challenges as they grow, getting more popular or more competitive, but one challenge in particular is nearly universal for console games: an invisible line that runs through every community. Two sides that work together and mutually respect each other, but they're two separate sides nonetheless. There are those that use the original hardware, and those that don't. Now, I'm not here to stoke the fires of the console versus emulator war, because it's just not worth my time. But we have to acknowledge that it's part of the community's history, whether we want it to be or not. For the purposes of the story, in the spring of 2018, my sister had our family's console, and somehow the price of the game had gone up over time. And without my MacBook setup, Harvest Moon speedrunning would be a hobby that I just couldn't afford. Thankfully, TBJ had gone through a long time ago and had published specific settings that would allow us to match up to an acceptable degree. Now, I had a MacBook, so I had to tweak my own settings, but it wasn't something I really paid a lot of attention to, because at the end of the day, I just wanted to play a game with my friends. But in March of 2018, Cypher was about to drop 3 consecutive all photos runs, one of which was beyond what anyone else could do at the time on a console. When Cypher submitted his first all photos run, the pause and unpause times were happening faster than the original hardware. Demo and Cypher talked about it in a private chat and they considered it sorted. So when his second attempt still had faster loading times, Demo once again confronted him about it, except that this time, the settings were all correct. He'd followed TBJ's guide as written, but the loading times still didn't match up. And the question now became, how do we address this? And how can we keep it from happening in the future? Demo brought me, Desert, and TBJ all together to get our thoughts about it. If the run was rejected, it would be the second time the only person who's been able to complete this run was denied a spot on the board due to a technicality. It's not even that he'd broken any rules, it's that following the rules hadn't led to the intended result. Now, different speedrunning communities have handled this problem in different ways, but most communities are hundreds strong by the time they reach this decision point. We were just 4 average people who specialized in where to find potpourri on a Friday. The VI refresh rate of Project 64 running through a virtual machine on a MacBook was a bit out of our depth. The discussion got beyond my understanding pretty quickly, but I believe the problem was that TBJ's guide was written for the English version, and Cypher was running on the Japanese version, which has different default settings. Whatever the problem was, TBJ identified it and rewrote the guide to address it. And the third time around, Cypher verified the settings and even showed them on stream before he started, just to cover his bases. And for the third time in a row, Cypher got all 16 photos, this time in under 8 hours.
That was brutal, but I think we did it. I think we did it.
It was a huge milestone for the community, and there was only one problem with it. The load times were still faster than the console. But the rules didn't specify a requirement for load times, only what settings an emulator should be used. Cypher had done everything in his power to follow the rules, and to give credit where it's due, the mods let him keep it on the board. But there was a thick sense of unease about it, especially among certain console runners who thought the emulator gave him an unfair advantage, or that it wasn't a true world record because it wasn't done with original hardware. But even Demo didn't use original hardware, so where do you draw the line?
But I'm using my GameCube controller. So that's the only way I'm able to play this, because my N64 controllers are horrible.
Cypher was way ahead of the game when it came to NPC affection tracking. He was manually counting each individual NPC's affection, while the rest of us were using cutscene triggers and other less efficient means. But that didn't stop rumors that he was using a memory viewer off-screen or modifying the game code to skew events in his favor. And even Cypher and I weren't immune to it. We both had suspicions of the other at some point, but suspicions were all they ever were. And if anyone didn't like an emulator run at the top, they were just gonna have to beat it themselves.
Oh, I guess there's also the fact that I got everybody to 200 affection instead of 160. But that's just on me not tracking it properly.
And by the time I finished my first all photos run at the end of March, the cracks were still there if you looked hard enough, but it felt like things were heading back to normal. Until April 2nd, when a single Karen marriage run ripped the wound wide open. Now, I don't think Gogo had any idea what he was getting himself into, nor do I think any of the events that followed were his fault. But on April 2nd, Gogo TBC submitted a Karen marriage run that claimed to be the world record time by 4 seconds. Gogo had cut off a significant amount of time by swapping a day of bridge work with watching Mana's cows. Unfortunately, he'd done it on an emulator, and the first thing the mods looked at was the loading times. When you set them side by side, Gogo's screen appears to load a lot faster, but the actual difference between the time you select sleep and the time you regain control of your character is somewhere between 30 and 50 milliseconds. And over 120 days, it adds up to somewhere between 3 and 5 seconds total. Gogo was using a faster route than the previously established one, but he was also less efficient because he was new to it. The resulting time difference from world record pace happened to be about the same as the emulator load difference, and the fairness of emulator runs flared back up in the group Discord, some claiming that the emulator users didn't deserve to be on the leaderboard at all, and the mods were forced to make an impossible decision. There was no practical way to verify emulator runs, and there weren't enough mods to realistically do it anyway. But banning emulator runs would alienate half the community's active runners, especially since emulator runners didn't have any representation among the moderators. The decision to hide emulator runs from the leaderboard remains by far the group's most controversial decision. As loyal to the original as it was, it also wasn't very well suited for a group the size of the Harvest Moon 64 community. And as attractive as the idea was to move us all to console in theory, the reality was a little bit different. You see, a Nintendo 64 isn't a very cheap investment, and as much as we also like the idea of using a separate and reliable CPU to run the game, dropping that kind of money just wasn't a realistic option for some of us. Now, the attempt to create consistency is laudable, but not giving an alternate option to those of us without access to a console was a massive oversight. The message they sent was that we would never be taken seriously here, not so long as we used an emulator. I had just finished my first All Photos run a few days before, and if you've watched the series, you know how much that means to me. So those of us who wanted to be taken seriously and didn't have access to a console, well, we left. A few days later, Demo reached out to me personally so he could buy me a console, complete with controller and Japanese cartridge. And this generosity is the only reason this isn't the end of my story.